There's another email that was sent out by the FIA talking about the Formula One regs, basically saying that they're pretty happy with everything as it went in Miami. And I guess that they talked about the start and various other things to be looking at, but I guess they'll be ratifying that electric power boost that they've been talking about sooner rather than later. And nothing significant other than that going forward into 27, they're thinking about giving more ICE, internal combustion engine power, and less electric. In other words, they're feeling that they did get the balance a bit over the top, 50-50. And it's already less than that now, and they're going back even further, which I think most of us could have told them in the first place. But anyway, a little bit like groove tyres, as I've always said, why do we need to have groove tyres in Formula One? Nobody seemed to complain. They were absolutely terrible. And then when Max finally did quietly withdraw them from the regs, Max Mosley that is, not Max Verstappen, there were no apologies either for messing up Formula One for a couple of years. So we might be, that's how 2026 is a little bit like that. We've got this, we had this going into the start of the year, this, massive thing with electrification, and now backing away from it. And that's not really good enough, is it? I mean, there are enough good, brilliant people in Formula One, whether you're talking Formula One teams, whether you're talking the FIA, as limited as they are relative to the teams, and of course in Liberty. So yeah, let's hope from here on in it'll be pretty stable and we can get on with some real motor racing. The first sign of which we really saw in Miami, which was very good. Julian Thursday. Yesterday, I watched a podcast with Pino Allievi, great Italian journalist, where Aldo Costa was the guest. When they asked him about Adrian Newey, he made almost the exact same point you did months ago on your podcast. What the hell is he doing at Honda's factory in Japan in November? It is too late. Yeah, well, yeah, well done, Aldo, who's a good man. And I think is now at Dallara, I think. Good man, as is, of course, Gianpaolo Dallara. The original GP, the great GP. And yeah, Adrian Newey wearing an Aston Martin cap at Monaco, and he doesn't realize that Honda have got a problem until 6 months later. Why wasn't he flying directly to Narita after Monaco, straight to Japan, absolutely paranoid that the same thing might happen that happened with McLaren and Honda when they got back together, that Honda in Japan might be left to their own devices, particularly as this is such a new engine. And they need to be spoon-fed and watched absolutely minute by minute. And Aston Martin need to set up their own division in Japan right next to Honda, just to bring engineers into it as well, as indeed Honda do when they come to work with a British team in England. Why didn't Adrian do that? Where did he go after Monaco? Oh, back to England. Why? Ronnie Way. Peter, you're very human, hopefully, and passionate about motorsport. You're very knowledgeable, and we're lucky to have you sharing what you've done through. Thank you very much. Very kind. Move on to the next one. Thank you, Peter. Chances that Team Verstappen can win the Nurburgring 24 hours? Anything can go wrong in 24 hours. Yeah, I'm a bit nervous about it all because A, it's the Nurburgring, and B, it's all about speed differential for me, these races, 24 hours, darkness as well, big drama. So I just hope everybody's safe. That's all I want out of this. I know Max will have fun, and all things being equal, no issues. Of course they'll blitz it, no doubt about it. Great drivers there as well. Danny Juncadella is a good friend. I've followed his career right from day one. You see all the videos I've done with him over the years. And the good drivers there. Max, brilliant, obviously. But it is a 24-hour race with a lot of slow drivers and cars doing funny things and stopping in weird places. And it's a very, very difficult circuit to marshal. So I don't want to think about it too much, actually. I'm quite happy to look at it after the race, as I said. Peter, this is from Sarosh. Hi, Sarosh, another of our regulars, and welcome to the show. I was watching the 2006 Imola Grand Prix with Michael and Alonso racing. Surprise for me was Michael most of the time had an overlap of throttle and brakes. Alonso didn't. Must say Michael's defense was superb. Yeah, I mean that was a classic race of how defense can be as enthralling as attack. don't tell the statisticians who love to talk about the number of overtakes you have per race in Formula One, or indeed the rule makers. But I've always maintained defence, and epitomised by Michael there was, you know, was absolutely the it was just a brilliant race from beginning to end. It's an interesting comment you make about Michael. I always felt that Michael was incredibly clean in terms of overlap and very, very good. That's not to say that he didn't brake against throttle. Of course he did. He left foot braked, but he perfectly is one of the few drivers that's perfectly been able, particularly in that era, to use that as balance without slowing the car down. And that was what Michael was doing there. He was showing his skill, really, his footwork, and how good he was in that race. But I don't think Michael was ever guilty of over braking with the left foot and therefore slowing the car down. He was exceptionally good in that area. Do you think George has the mentality to fight back if Kimi has another win in Canada? Oh yeah, definitely. George, I think, is pretty strong mentally, very strong. Whether he has the technique is a much bigger question. He definitely has the tenacity, but is he going to be able to out Kimi in the slow corners, even at Silverstone? You know, that twiddly bit after turn 1 and 2, or at the end of the first long straight at Silverstone. Kimi's going to be really quick just there. That'll give him a good run onto the old pit straight. Yeah, George will be good through Copse. Yeah, George will be good through Beckett's. But all the other twiddly stuff also coming back down towards the end of the lap. Kimi will be good there too. So there's Silverstone. Hungary, a lot of slow corners there. I'm not saying Kimi can't drive medium fast, but he's better than George on slow. That's the point. And, you know, that's it. Another one from Sarosh. Hi, Peter. GP was driving a lap in the simulator with Max guiding him. What struck me was quickly Max told him to upshift. It was almost as if there was no engine braking and the car was running away. Yeah, well, that's interesting that you point that out. I mean, it kind of underlines the general theorem that great drivers, if they're left in a choice between a high gear or a low gear, will always go for the lower gear because everything's a bit softer and a bit calmer. And thinking about it, just on that comment now, I think, you know, when we started to see in the Bahrain test that one of the quick ways of getting this energy deployed or harvested was to sort of go back through the gears at quite high revs, going into, say, turn 10 in Bahrain. And I said at the time, you know, Max isn't going to like that. He was one of the first guys doing it. We know that, but it's not part of his DNA to drive that way. I mean, he'll always want to be in a lower gear if he can. And I suspect, actually, now there's less power out there. I suspect now that's another reason these new regs have sort of gravitated a little bit towards Max's style. Not style, Max's flow of driving, because there isn't so much need to have to sort of really rev the thing and hold these long gears, and he can start to short shift. And one of the best moments of any Grand Prix for me, or any time in practice even, is to be on board with Max when he's just driving out of the pits and out of the pit lane, and just to listen to his gear changing and the sequence of his gear changing as he's accelerating once he gets out of the speed limit area. And I love that because it's always, you know, and things vibrating away, and that Red Bull powertrain Ford sounds a little bit like, you know, a rusty old tractor from the barn when it's off cam, if that's the right word. I don't know what these engines can be these days when they're not, you know, then he's not on it at all. It's just going down the pit lane. It's and then he gets out of the pit lane thing and he starts accelerating. It's but then it's incredible how quickly he's going through the gears. You go bah, 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 and he just does that all the time. He very quickly likes to get in as long a gear as he can straight away. I just love that moment. I'm sure other drivers do the same, but not all. A lot of them like to feel that. Pierre Gasly's one likes to feel that surge of acceleration. Max is just like, bah, 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 okay, I'm there now, and I'll think about the lap. Jez, another one. Michael Jackson once said that thinking when dancing is the biggest mistake you can make. You have to feel, which I think top racing drivers can relate to. Oh, absolutely. And not all athletes, top athletes, definitely. I saw it Alejandro Del Rey actually after his rounds in the Catalunya Open Championship golf. Actually, Jack was talking to him, saying, you know, why do you take 2 practice swings sometimes and only 1 practice swing another time? And sometimes you know, you walk up to the ball, look, other times you don't. And he said, it's different. Every shot is different. And I just have to do what feels right at the time for me to hit that ball. I just want to keep it completely natural. And therefore, sometimes I try not to do any practice swings because I want the first swing to be the swing. That's how I just want to express what I'm doing. And that's exactly the same thing. And I'm sure it's the same with tennis players. You know, if you talk to somebody like, Alcaraz, is he thinking, all he's thinking about is positioning really, and that's just peripheral vision really, and then he's letting that guide where he's going on the court. And so it is, and the same with any artist, I'm sure. You know, that everything is emotion and feel. Everything, so many things are emotional. I mean, I was talking to Guy Edwards once, and I talk about Guy a lot on this channel because for me, he still remains the single best procurer of motor racing sponsorship I've ever met. And he was also an extremely good racing driver as well. So Guy Edwards was one of the most important and one of the pivotal figures of motor racing in the 20th century. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And I can't even begin to think of how much money he actually raised over the years for various teams. And not only in motorsport, he did the HSBC deal for Heathrow Airport, for London, for the City of London. A lot of cabs, a lot of those jetway things at Heathrow. That was a Guy Edwards deal. Anyway, I was talking to Guy about selling once, because there was a time when I wanted to be a great salesman as well, only because I wanted lots of money to go motor racing with, and didn't do very well at it. I got a little bit, but not a lot, for Nigel. And I said to Guy, you know, what is it? When, you know, I can understand how you're thinking here with the silk cut deal or whatever it was, and how you put those deals together, but how did you actually get them across the line? Because so many people say, yeah, great idea, and then basically it all fades away. And he said, he said the most important thing when you're selling is emotion. You've got to be passionate and believe in the product. If you're not doing that and you're just trying to do it based on a slideshow or these days a PowerPoint or whatever it is, it's never going to work. You've got to be personally, passionately involved in this. It's got to be your life and death. And I've always remembered that. And it's just an example of how passion of the type we're talking about, an emotion, is so important in everything we do. And yeah, of course, the great drivers, they're not thinking of tiny details. They're not thinking very much. That's why if Max Verstappen was on this show, and we had lots of questions to Max about short corners and why he does this and why he does that, I'd be willing to bet that he would just say, I don't know, really. I haven't really thought about it, and I don't know. I don't want to talk about that. And you move on. The same way Jim Clark didn't want to talk about it to his best mate, Jackie Stewart. It's like, partly they don't know because they're doing it emotionally and they're doing it through feel and touch, and it's just all happening inside their body and their brain. And partly because they see it as a personal thing, therefore, and they don't really want to talk about it. And Jackie respected that with Jim Clark. That's why he never really asked Jimmy why he did a corner that way or braked at this point. And except for the famous occasion when Jackie was telling Jimmy that he had run out of brakes going into Stowe one year, I think in the when he was racing sports cars, very early days. And Jimmy said, well, you must have had a massive shunt, did you? And Jackie said, well, no, I threw the car sideways, did this. Jimmy said, well, obviously you hadn't been braking on the limit then, had you? Anyway, yeah, it's a good point, though. It's a fascinating point. It's a fascinating thing. And I wonder, I mean, Rob Wilson's done a very good job with his vest to simulate simulate a lap, a sort of Rob Wilson lap of any given circuit. And he could program it, therefore, to simulate a Carlos Sainz version of the same lap or a Jacques Lafitte version of the same lap. And it's pulsations on, you feel through the vest if you're turning in a little bit early, or whatever it is, a green light if you're turning in at the right moment. And you can see all this on the dash, and Porsche use it a lot. And that will get, I don't know, that would get 95% of the way there probably, but the last few percent are always going to be feel and touch and just the brain going into this other zone of slow motion. And that can be golf, that can be motor racing, that can be Michael Jackson. Hi, Peter. Thank you for your job. Thank you. Why Oscar was faster than Lando in Japan, and in Miami it was the other way around? Reg changes. Also, Colapinto was better than Gasly in Miami. I think in Miami, Oscar got a bit psyched out by the wind, the crosswinds, and he had a couple of moments in qualifying. And because he hasn't yet, well, let's go back a step further to Japan. I felt in Japan that Oscar was indeed starting to really become the Oscar that he used to be in his first 6 months at McLaren, starting to turn in earlier, shorter corners, focusing on being very soft and supple into the corner. And it looked that way to me. And I think the results showed that. But it didn't translate when he came to Miami. Now, is that due to the new regulations helping Lando more than Oscar and taking Lando into Oscar's area now and then putting Oscar under some pressure again, as a result of which he started to brake a little bit later in a straight line and then had a moment in the crosswind and then backed away from that moment and then didn't really get a quick lap out of the car? Is it that? Maybe it is. Yeah, I can't say McLaren would know that, would have evidence of proof of that, but probably the new regs have helped Lando a bit because I don't think he's ever going to push a car to the absolute limit consistently. I think he's always going to be a little bit under it now. Championship one, nice team. If the car's good, he'll be right there sort of attitude. And I think with as it was in Miami, it's obviously it's a circuit that Lando enjoys anyway, and it doesn't penalize drivers who do turn in a little bit later and extend the straight. It doesn't penalize them. It does still reward drivers who do it absolutely perfectly with shorter corners, but there's no real penalty to drive the way Carlos Sainz or Lando or Oscar drive. And I think Oscar and what happened? I mean, it's a very good question as to why Oscar was so poor in qualifying, because a lot of it you could say, what we saw on Sunday was due to his track position, but he just didn't look as good as Lando in the car, did he? And that was the problem. And I think it could be something like that, that suddenly Oscar was doing what he did and it worked in Japan, and then the regulations changed and suddenly Lando was on Oscar's territory. And as a result, Oscar went back into where the mode he was last year of looking at Lando's telemetry to see why and where he was quick. And then all of a sudden lost focus of his own lap and started to drive with. And when you're driving, braking in a straight line as late as you can, turning in late, Lando's always going to beat Oscar at that, in my opinion, because he's just a bit softer with everything he does. But when Oscar can find an advantage and start to shorten the corners, then he'll always do Lando. But he didn't do that in Miami. He did not do that in Miami. And maybe it was just a reflex action to go back to where he was last year. We'll see how it goes in Canada. Colapinto, yeah. Again, I don't think longer corners were a huge disadvantage in Miami. But it looks like there was not a great front end on that car, and they did change the feel and the balance of the car a bit, and Pierre couldn't do anything with the front of the car, and the back was working. And from Colapinto's point of view, that's what he wants. He wants a back that works so he can lean on that rear and then get the power on soon. And he did a very good job at that. As good as it was, he did a good job at that, but it meant that Pierre couldn't get anything out of the car at all and was scratching around and confused probably. Global. When speaking of rallying, what did you make of Rovan Perez's foray into the single seaters? Yeah, not very good, was it? There is a video there on the Red Bull thing of Callie driving an old Red Bull Formula One car around the Red Bull ring. And actually, I remember watching it at the time, about 2 weeks after it happened. I remember thinking, it doesn't actually look that quick. He wasn't really doing much with the car. He was doing a good job, but everything was on rails and very carefully orchestrated. And I just thought, it's a bit odd. It's not how he drives a rally car. Anyway, then he made this decision to go circuit racing. And then then it was going to be Formula 2, sorry, Super Formula, Formula 2, Formula 1. I remember thinking, well, he wouldn't be doing that unless he was very confident that it could happen. And obviously Toyota are behind him and they believe that that's the way to go. And so, mega. And then, Richard Selwyn, my mate, engineer, ex iSport, now with high tech, went out to Japan to help. And I thought, well, if he's there, that's good news as well. But then he just got sick and nauseous and couldn't drive the car. And then he did the New Zealand series and went pretty well in the wet in one race, running in the top 3 or 4. But in the dry, not really there. That's about what you'd expect, I suppose. But you'd also expect, if he's confident of getting into Formula 1 and he's a rally champion, he should really be dominating that New Zealand series. That's what I would have thought. And yet he didn't. And then he went back into Super Formula and to more testing and decided that wasn't going to work. So all very sad, really, but a little bit like Kimi, Formula 1, rallying. But Finns are like that, aren't they? I'm not sure he's worried about it. And I'm sure he can do whatever he wants with Toyota in the future. They love him, quite correctly so. And Toyota is such a good company these days. They're like like Ford used to be in the 70s when, Ford dominated motor racing really. And the Ford Motorsport press conference every year was the biggest thing you could go to. And Ford had feet in every part of the motor racing spectrum. And Toyota are like that today, and they will look after Cali. It'd be interesting to see what he does. It might be WEC, might go back to rallying. Interesting to see. Emmanuel J09. Hi, Peter. Is anything less than being able to drive an F1 car at the limit? Cars that require full commitment to get the best out of them is just not Formula One. What's the ideal car for Formula One, in your opinion? Yeah, I agree. I think that is right. I think anything less than a car that is very, very difficult to drive on the limit, but can be balanced with astute use of throttle, brakes, and steering in a perfect world, 4-wheel drift. That is a perfect Formula One car, 250F Maserati. What is the ideal car for Formula One in your opinion? Well, go right back to basics. You'd want to strip virtually all of the aero off any of the current cars for a start. And then you'd want to have more suspension travel, and you'd want to have slightly longer braking areas. So braking became more of a thing and a passing zone. And you'd want to have 2 or 3 tire companies in competition. And you could limit everything. Obviously, you can limit all sorts of things. You can limit top speeds, you can limit cornering loads, you can do all of that. But generally speaking, you want cars that can be drifted and cars that can be slid out of corners with power oversteer. A lot of power oversteer means you're going a little bit slower, but tires that don't degrade too quickly. So yeah, what are we talking about here? We're talking here about the 66 Brabham BT19, are we not? I mean, the angles that Denny Hulme and Jack Brabham used to get in that car, that engine note, that 3-litre Repco V8, beautiful chassis, incredibly well balanced Ron Toronac, Jack Brabham design space frame chassis, Goodyear tires, racing against Firestone at the time. So we had the tire war. Absolutely fabulous. And again, the problem is, if you think of the number of sponsors, say McLaren have got, where would they put all those logos on this car? They don't have the side pods. They don't have the front and rear wings. That's the problem. And it is a real problem. As much as you may think that's a stupid thing, it's a real problem. And that's why we'll never go back to that look of car, in my opinion, very sadly, because too much money is made by all these advertising hoardings on the car called aerodynamics. There's Peter being an absolute heathen when it comes to engineering. But, what would Adrian say about that? So that would be me. That's what I would do. And I loved that era. I have to say, I loved the 80s, the late 80s, the turbo era of the late 80s, particularly 86, 87. I know I was lucky, privileged to be at Williams at the time, but that 11 and 11B Honda was a brutal car. And although we had big front and rear wings, we didn't have a lot of didn't have a lot of ground effect, and those cars had to be driven by real racing drivers, and it was amazing. We had obviously Nigel and Nelson, and then we had Alan Prost and Ayrton Senna. It was a pretty good era, and that brought the best out in racing drivers too. And there is an era where you did have good hoardings on the car, and we had a great car with Canon, Mobil, ICI, Denim, as well as Honda logos on the car. So it all worked and all fitted. So yeah, let's go back to that. 1,000 horsepower, 1,200 horsepower, not much downforce, big rear wing, big front wing. Get on with it. Simple, lovely. My favorite Grand Prix car in terms of shape and look, aesthetics, the way they look on the racetrack, the way the driver sits in them, the helmets. My favorite all-time car, the 65 Formula One car, 1.5 litre, Lotus, BRM, Ferrari, Brabhams, all beautiful. It's this podcast, the Dorkomotive podcast. I was listening to it the other day in the car, driving up to Barcelona, actually. Brian Loans. Really, really good. He's a technical guy, American, and fascinated by all things motor racing, plus aerospace, plus other stuff. Great. I really recommend his podcast. It's very, very good. And he's got a great podcast out at the moment, well, one I was listening to anyway, about the Mickey Thompson 67 Indy car. I don't know if you know anything about that, but here it is. Here's a picture of it. And it's it is the most unusual race car of all time, I think, because and we often get questions on the live stream about, 6-wheel Tyrrells and Brabham fan cars and this and that. 6-wheel Williams as well, which were banned. But this car, look at that. It's front-wheel drive. Well, it's front engine, first of all. Look where the driver's sitting almost over the rear axle. That's Sammy Sessions. Drove it, raced it, tried to race it at Indy, didn't qualify. Front-wheel drive. But look at the rear axle. Rear-wheel steering. Rear-wheel steering, front-wheel drive, front-engined, 5-litre Chevy V8, very light, which also Mickey Thompson did the engine himself. And the car was built by Joe Haffiker, but designed by Mickey Thompson, who was famous in America for many years as the first American to break 400 miles an hour at the Bonneville Salt Flats, land speed record holder. And he was incredibly innovative. Of course, there was a huge shadow over his name after the 64 Indy 500 shunt, triggered really by Dave McDonald in the Mickey Thompson car. But as Brian points out in the podcast, no defense of that, but the regulations changed on wheel size from 63 to 64, which made that 64 car much more unwieldy. And that was one of the reasons that the very talented Dave McDonald lost control of that. Anyway, I thought you'd like to see that, because in terms of innovation, I would say innovation always, I suppose the true sense of innovation is that it actually triggers something for the future. I'm not sure that triggered much. Front wheel drive, maybe. I guess he was lured in by the success of the Minis and the Monte Carlo Rally at that point. Rear wheel steering. I remember doing a day with Nigel Mansell at Honda in Swindon in England, circa 85, I guess. And it was the rear wheel steering Honda Prelude, launch thereof. And Nigel was there doing a demo of it, but they had sort of cones in the car park there, doing it as a weave. And he completely lost it in the middle, just completely lost it. And he said, I don't want to drive this thing again, completely forget it, And I think the same could be said probably for this car. I can't imagine what that would have been like going around Indy. You can see it's sort of got opposite lock on the rear axle already. Can you believe that? Anyway, in looking for that picture, and big thanks to the Henry Ford for that. Also, I came across this. This is the Rob Wilson philosophy of this is why Wikipedia and the internet is not as good as encyclopedias, because the whole point of going through books is that you find lots of interesting stuff on the way, whereas the internet just takes you straight to your target, well, in theory. And that's why we still love books. And that's why going through these archives, I loved it as well, because I came across this photograph, 67 Indy testing, I guess, not even qualifying. And that is the Mallard, which is the last in 68, it became the last front engine car to qualify for the Indy 500. It actually didn't qualify in 67, interestingly enough. That's its creator and driver on the left with the helmet, Jim Hurtubise. In the cockpit, and the reason I love this photograph, the number of people are fascinated by it. In the cockpit, of course, is Colin Chapman, who's trying to work out where the gear shift is and how to get his feet on the pedals, I guess. On the right is Jochen Rindt, who was attempting to qualify for Indy that year. This is 67 and didn't. And as I mentioned, a lot of it was nausea in case of Jochen going around Indy, which was the prelude to the nausea he would feel in Formula One at circuits like Clermont-Ferrand in 70, when he went to a fully faced helmet for the first time. Hand on the rollover bar is Dan Gurney, looking at it all. And on the left there, scratching his head, is Jackie Stewart. I mean, it's pretty impressive, isn't it? And that's, I don't know whether that's, am I being a bit over romantic here and saying, isn't it nice how much interest everybody took of everybody's cars in those days? Jackie sat in the car, Jochen sat in the car, everybody loved it. And they're all mates of Jim Hurtubise. So I came across that picture, thought you'd like that. On the Limit, 21. Hi, Peter, thanks for doing these live chats. Do you think Formula One moves too slowly? The talk of bringing back the V8 is great, but 2030? Well, you could argue that 2030 is not that far away if you're an engine builder. It's effectively 3 years away, and that's about the absolute minimum limit you could have to do a new power unit. So you could say, well, it's happening really quickly, isn't it? Equally, I think it does, yeah. There's nothing like pressure to put on people, and if they came up with a formula which could allow them to recycle some of the old stuff, it'd be more fun, wouldn't it? And just get on with it. Next year, okay, fully normally aspirated engines next year, get on with it. It'd be interesting to do that, wouldn't it? Because with the Williams FW14B Renault, which obviously was an active ride car, and all the computation that was required in order to start that car, when they did the rebuild of that car a few years ago now, none of that stuff worked. And it wasn't the problem with the software, it was the hardware didn't exist anymore. And that's why, to get that engine running and the car running, Williams had to go to Cosworth to come up with new hardware with which to use the software, because Renault had chucked all the old hardware away. Interesting, isn't it? So if they went back to old engines, they'd probably have the same problem, but I'm sure they'd get around that quite quickly. But to Formula One, do we really care? I mean, think about this. In 66, the Formula One went to 3 litres from 1.5. It was a big change, double the size engine overnight. And one of the customer engines available for several private teams, and indeed the factory Cooper team, was the Maserati V12, 3-litre V12. What was that engine? How did that come about? I can tell you how that engine came about. That was an engine raced in a 250F Maserati driven by Juan Manuel Fangio in 1958. That's when that V12 first appeared. And I say 57 it would have been, 57 Italian Grand Prix. And it didn't really do much, but it had always been there. And it was used, 6, 8 years later. So those things are quite interesting. Engines don't go away, You could recycle them, bring them back. We don't really care. We just want really good racing. And that's what we want. Spectacular racing. So I do think 2030, thinking about it, I think it's a very good point you make. And I think it is too long to wait. Forlorn Squad. Hi, Peter. Ronnie Peterson is known as one of the fastest drivers in the history of the sport. You watched him firsthand. How quick was he and in what style? Oh, massive oversteer, wide turn in, late breaker, straight line braking. And if the variables were thrown at him, had a problem. It definitely lost the 73 British Grand Prix. I was talking about Revson earlier. That's where Revy won that race. Just shorter corners, the oil went down, track grip changed. Ronnie had a massive moment, backed away a little bit like Oscar and Lando in qualifying in Miami, and Revy just went through, adjusted a little bit, manipulated the car and won the race. And but Ronnie I don't know if I mentioned, it's a great Formula 3 video just come out of Ronnie, Tim Schenken, Charlie Lucas, all racing at Cadwell Park, Formula 3, 69, and James Hunt. At the beginning of his F3 career, he and Ronnie have quite a big battle, actually. And it's interesting to see there, Ronnie, even then, Ronnie's having his first race ever in the March 693. And you can see him sliding like this. And James Hunt's a lot more linear in the way he's driving. Tim Schenken, unbelievably quick that day. Really good. Ronnie, yeah, that was Ronnie. You know, just very oversteery, very soft and fluid, very Gilles Villeneuve-like, actually, in the way he drove. Lovely to watch him. Ronnie, I remember watching Ronnie, actually 73 Woodcote in qualifying. Incredible drifts through Woodcote, the British Grand Prix. And then one of the great moments of my viewing career in Formula One, Monaco, early Monaco, Thursday morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, outside of Casino Square on the barrier, Ronnie in the Lotus 72, sideways as he comes into view, and then just not hitting the barrier, just that far from the barrier, the left rear coming all the way down the hill, moves a little bit for the bump and then into Mirabeau. And it was early morning at Monaco, fresh, crisp air, the Cosworth engine. Oh, beautiful. There's a picture I found the other day, very odd picture. It must have been taken by my photographer at Autocar. And after practice for the 78 Italian Grand Prix at Monza, I did my, well, not a usual thing, but often I went to the car park where the drivers would sort of, a couple of hours after practice, I'd sort of stand by. I knew whatever car they were in. And Mario, as ever, had a Achille Motors Rolls Royce and was driving up to Villa d'Este, where he was staying. And Ronnie was going with him. And I went there and I got to the car park, and Mario hadn't arrived and Deanne wasn't there. But Ronnie had the boot up of the roller and was sitting in the boot with his knees up under his chin, and was just, I don't know what he was doing, reading Autosport, I think. Anyway, I went up and said, "Oh, hi, Ronnie." And we started to chat about the 79 McLaren, because he'd already signed for McLaren, and how that car was looking so good, and it was going to be a Lotus 79 on steroids. It was going to disappear, and wasn't it going to be brilliant? And he's looking forward to that so much. And anyway, Ron Easton, when Mario arrived, Ron Easton, my photographer, obviously thought, "Oh, that's Mario Andretti," and because I was going to give Ron a lift back to the hotel in my car, obviously, and he saw Mario then. He took a picture, and there's a picture of Mario, Ronnie sitting in the thing, and you can just see half of my face sort of talking to Ronnie still. And I only mentioned that because, of course, that was the day before Ronnie died, and I only found that photograph the other day. It's pure chance that I'm even in a little bit of the frame, and it's so sad when I think of Ronnie and how happy he was at that moment at Monza on the Saturday night, thinking about 79. Great guy. Really love Ronnie. Got on with him very well. Did an interview with him once in his home. He was very into fish. He had a big aquarium, and he found it very relaxing just to sit in the living room watching the fish in the aquarium. Moving in the water pretty much as Ronnie moved a racing car. Peter, I'd love to ask you about scarbs, about the Lotus 80 from 79. I love the shape without wings. Was the Lotus 80 essentially the correct design if there hadn't been porpoising and sticking skirts? Well, I was around then at Lotus, obviously, because I was with Carlos. And when Colin was talking to Carlos about the Lotus 80, it was always, you think the 79 is good. Wait till the 80. It's a 79 with full-length skirts. So what downforce we got in the middle, we've now got front to rear. It's unbelievable. And Carlos would say, but the skirt is curved. Is curved, Colin? Or no, it's straight skirt. No, it's curved, And Carlos is on the train back from Norwich thinking, saying to me, how they do this with the curved skirt. I understand this. Anyway, he was quite right to hit on that because it never worked. They always kept jamming. And it was the first episode of porpoising, wasn't it? And when Mario was talking about it, man, it's porpoising, bouncing up and down. I can't see where I'm going. It was the first onboard camera, I think. And they put this camera on Mario's car testing at Silverstone, and you could see the front of the car coming up off the ground, going down Hanger Straight. Now you believe me, eh, guys? And yeah, and they just couldn't get the skirts. The skirts were too complicated in length and shape ever to be But think about how difficult it was for the teams to get a straight skirt to sit comfortably on the road for the entire Grand Prix distance and sliding up and down beautifully over bumps and curbs. And multiply that by, I don't know what, 10,000, because you're suddenly doing it with curves. And that's what the 80 was all about. So yeah, in theory, the 80 was a good car in that sense. It was a sound idea, but in practice, it was an impossible idea because the skirts never worked. And when Ligier lost their pace in 79, when the Williams started to really go well and the Ligiers went off the boil, it was purely because they couldn't get the skirts to stay down on the Ligier, and because they were getting chassis flex on the Ligier chassis, and that was starting to affect the way the skirts moved up and down, and their skirts started jamming, and you get a bit of rubber inside the slides and things like that. And whereas Williams had a very rigid chassis, and the skirts were the most effective skirts in Formula One. Flimico. Hi Peter, greetings from Switzerland. Love all your streams. My question is your opinion, who is the most gifted natural Formula One driver in history? Thank you. Jim Clark. Yeah, got to say it. Got to say Jim Clark. James Clark Jr., as his real name was. Could drive anything. Lovely person. Totally fascinated by racing cars and cars in general. Not really interested in money or glory or fame. In fact, didn't like any of it, and was blindingly quick in every type of condition, every type of car. End of story.